Elizabeth Manns, and I'd like to welcome you to the April 4th Coalition Show. This is the June 9th, 2025 edition of the show. And the April 4th Coalition's mission statement is, we are for workers' rights and collective bargaining rights and are against tax breaks for the rich and corporations who ship our jobs overseas. We support all the articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but as is our custom, we put the emphasis on Article 23 at the start of the show. Dick, would you like to start?
Yes. Number one, everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and protection against unemployment.
Number two, everyone without any discrimination has the right to equal pay for equal work.
Number three, everyone who works has the right to just and favorable remuneration, which is any form of compensation, ensuring for himself or herself and his or her family an existence worthy of human dignity. And Michael?
Yeah. Number four, says everyone has the right to form and join trade unions for to protect his or her interests.
Also, we would like to say thank you to the staff at WMNB for airing the audio portions of our show on Fridays at 6 p.m. and to the NBCTC staff, Matthew Tucker, Nicole A. Brown, and Joanne Hurlbut, who without their assistance, we would not be able to put this show on the air. And Dick, since I was out of town, I'm going to let you take the lead on this.
Right, okay. Well, I was surprised to look at the news yesterday and hear about all the activation of the National Guard, and the governor of California is suing the President of the United States, saying he doesn't want those National Guard to go in there, and it looks like they're setting up a police state. They're threatening to put 500 Marines on the ground in Los Angeles. But then listening to the commentators, a lot of people said, you know, Trump is really good at diverting attention.
Yes, he
And
is
right
very
now,
good.
what the news has been is that they have their big, beautiful bill.
That
And
lovely thing that passed the House of Representatives?
by one vote, and then people who voted for it came out and said, I didn't know that was in it. I would have never voted for it. Yeah. And so now it's in the Senate, and Elon Musk and his boyfriend Donald Trump had a big breakup because they disagree about the big beautiful bill, and so that's a big flare-up. So some people have said that his concentration on what's going on in Los Angeles was to divert the nation's attention to the big, beautiful bill. So I thought we'd give the first 10 minutes to Bernie Sanders to explain to us about the big, beautiful bill. And then we'll talk more about the riots.
Thank you all for being with me. As many of you know, the U.S. House of Representatives recently passed the so-called reconciliation bill by a vote of 215 to 214, a one-vote margin. Every Democrat voted against this bill. Almost every Republican voted for it. In the coming weeks, the U.S. Senate is expected to take the bill up. Let me take this opportunity to tell you what is in this piece of legislation. At a time of massive income and wealth inequality, this bill makes the obscenely rich, the oligarchs, even richer, while attacking the most basic needs of working families and the most vulnerable people in our society. This bill provides massive tax breaks to the richest people and largest corporations and pays for them by making gigantic cuts to Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, nutrition, education, and other programs that are life and death for working families, the children, and the elderly. This bill is what Trump economics is all about. If you are rich or a large multinational corporation, if you can make huge campaign contributions, you are entitled to massive tax breaks, and Congress will give you those tax breaks. But if you are working class or poor, and you can't make those large campaign contributions, you are entitled to nothing. You're not entitled to health care through Medicaid. You're not entitled to a nutrition program to feed your kids. You're not entitled to a decent education. Trumpism is about the belief that we live in a dog-eat-dog world where the big dogs are able to eat the little dogs. And that is the way it is. This bill would provide a $664 billion tax break to the top 1% at a time when the top 1% already own more wealth than the bottom 93%. It would provide a $420 billion tax breaks to large multinational corporations that are stashing their profits in offshore tax havens like the Cayman Islands. And by the way, this tax break makes it easier for those companies to invest in robots and artificial intelligence, with the result that they're going to be able to throw workers out on the streets. And how would Trump and the Republicans in Congress pay for these huge tax breaks for the wealthy and large corporations? Well, at a time when over 85 million Americans today are uninsured or underinsured, this bill slashes Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act by more than $715 billion. The Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, has estimated that this bill would eliminate health care for 13.7 million Americans. Almost 14 million Americans would lose their health care. Further, at a time when 22% of our seniors are trying to survive on less than $15,000 a year, and I don't know how anybody survives on that, this legislation will make it much harder for seniors to receive the care they desperately need in nursing homes. And here is something else that is really quite shocking. Just this week, Yale University and the University of Pennsylvania estimated that if this bill is enacted, over 50,000 Americans will die unnecessarily due to the massive cuts to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act. It's not rocket science. If people don't have access to health care and can't get to a doctor when they are sick, many will die unnecessarily. But it's not just our health care system that would be devastated by this legislation. While this bill provides massive tax breaks to billionaires, it would cut $290 billion from nutrition programs and would literally take food away from more than 2 million children and at least 250,000 low-income seniors. Recently, as you may have seen, on the TV program Meet the Press, Speaker Mike Johnson said that there was a quote-unquote moral component to this bill, a moral component. He was referring to the fact that this bill would require Americans to prove that they are working at least 80 hours a month before receiving Medicaid or food stamps. Let us see how quote-unquote moral that requirement really is. Last year, some 20 million Americans were either laid off or fired by their employers. They lost their jobs. And in our dysfunctional and cruel healthcare system, when you lose your job, you lose your healthcare. And that is what Medicaid is supposed to be all about. It is supposed to be there for those people who need it the most, the people, among others, who lose their jobs. All of us remember what happened during the COVID pandemic. In March and April of 2020, 22 million workers lost their jobs in a 2-month period. 22 million workers. People were lined up for miles at food banks to feed their families. What would have happened to them if they were unable to receive Medicaid or nutrition assistance? How many would have ended up in total desperation? How many would have actually died? Well, maybe you're thinking, that was then, it will never happen again. Well, take a look at what happened when Wall Street crashed the economy. Between October of 2008 and April of 2009, an average of 700,000 Americans lost their jobs every month through no fault of their own. What would have happened to many of those people without Medicaid, food stamps, and other federal assistance? But it's not just COVID and the 2008 recession that we should be thinking about. Consider what will likely be happening to jobs in our country in the very near future. Just last week, Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, one of the world's most powerful creators of artificial intelligence, predicted that AI, quote, could wipe out half of all entry-level white-collar jobs and spike unemployment 10 to 20% in the next 1 to 5 years, end of quote. Let me repeat. The head of one of the most powerful AI companies in the world is telling us that half of all entry-level white-collar jobs could be eliminated as a result of AI. And many blue-collar jobs will be eliminated through advances in robotics. And let us not forget, Medicaid does not just provide health insurance for individual Americans. It is the major source of funding for nursing homes throughout our country. Are my Republican friends going to suggest that seniors and people with severe disabilities work 80 hours a month before they can get Medicaid to pay for their nursing home coverage? Is that what they're thinking? And let me get back for a moment to the so-called morality issue. I happen not to be active in organized religion, not my thing. But I have read the Bible. And this is what Jesus said, and I quote, "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me." End of quote. That, my friends, is what morality is all about. I would hope that my colleagues in the Senate, especially those who claim to be religious, remember that very powerful passage. And let us be frank, in no religion, not Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, or any other, is it considered moral to enrich those who need it the least while taking basic necessities, food, healthcare, away from the desperate people who need it the most. Together, we can and must defeat this terrible legislation. Thank you.
Well, Bernie certainly put it in clear and stark terms for everybody to understand.
Yes.
Definitely did. And yes, I always say, wonderful, you say go get a job, but you're creating an economy that has no jobs. I just read a letter in the Berkshire Eagle, I think yesterday, about somebody who said that people should be getting jobs, you know, or looking
Yes.
for jobs or whatever. And yeah, there are, you know, and they say they're out there. Well, they're not out there, and they're not going to be out there for people. They just want everybody to die.
Yeah.
I said that a long time ago when this all started. I said it's kind of like what Hitler did. Anybody that had a mental illness or infirmed, I mean, he wanted to get rid of them. And the Jewish people he had a problem with. And so I thought that the first people that he'd go for were the poor, the elderly. That's what and this was a long time ago I thought about this, and then it just came true.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're going to stand together, and hopefully that won't happen. That's why we're the April 4th Coalition. We're for workers' rights and collective
Right.
bargaining rights, and we're against tax breaks for the rich and corporations who ship our
The
jobs.
jobs overseas.
Yeah, we're you know, we,
And not to mention corporations store their money overseas as
right.
well, so there's,
Yeah.
And
you
they
can't
ta-
even tax it.
I was going to have another video about AI, but I just want to make this thing about AI. They talk about how great it is. Artificial intelligence, my feeling is We want wisdom. We don't want artificial
Artificial
intelligence. We don't want it. But what we don't hear a lot, and I've heard a little bit on a few programs, and I did some research, that the vast amount of electricity that they consume, it's taken us back to, like, we've been conserving for many, many years, doing all these things to conserve power. These people, they're opening up nuclear power plants next to their buildings just to power it. And besides the electricity and fossil fuels, they want to have like nuclear power plants, coal burning plants, just to keep this AI going. Besides that, they take fresh drinking water. They need large, vast amounts of fresh drinking water to keep it cool so it doesn't overheat. So they're taking fresh water from communities. So
And
this
if
big,
that water's
beautiful.
dirty after that, you can't.
Well, I don't know about
And I
that.
don't think they have a distillation process.
But yeah,
for it.
in the big beautiful bill, they had a section there that states couldn't regulate AI for 10 years. So if all of a sudden they come and take all your water, but you can't regulate that? No, but anyways, I'm spending too much time on that, but you know, we have a crisis going on in our community. Last week we had guests talking about the business owner who confronted the mask ICE agents in Berkshire County, and all over the trouble with ICE mask, people saying they're police but not identifying themselves, no badges or whatever. Well, this has gone on steroids in Los Angeles, which is, you know, used to be part of Mexico a long time ago.
Yes, it
And
is. I wish they were there again.
it's
now.
probably the biggest, you know, Hispanic population, but it's always been an immigrant center anyways in Los Angeles. So, you know, so they're calling them insurrectionists or whatever, but I wanted to take a quick look at, you know, the history of insurrection, as they call it. Or we used to, in the 1930s, there were Hoovervilles, and there were bonus army, and the government sent the army on them to clear them out. Let's hear about a brief history of Hoovervilles and the bonus army.
During the years of the Great Depression, Hoovervilles sprang up across America. What was a Hooverville? Why was it called that? As the Great Depression continued to worsen, many who had lost their jobs were forced to leave their homes. With no place to live, these individuals, and even entire families, were forced to find shelter wherever they could. In many cases, the only option was for the homeless to construct shacks or shanties made out of anything and everything they could find. Boxes, wooden crates, tar paper, and even old sheets were being utilized as makeshift homes. Villages of these shacks sprang up in parks and empty plots of land throughout the country. Many cities would not allow the homeless to congregate in this manner, so the shacks would show up on the outskirts of town or just outside of city limits. The term shantytown became quite common to describe these types of dwellings. However, because so many in the nation saw President Herbert Hoover as being responsible for the economic woes, a new name emerged. Many began calling these villages Hoovervilles. In 1932, a disgruntled group of homeless World War I veterans decided to create a Hooverville inside Washington, D.C. They placed their little community on the National Mall, in between the Washington and Lincoln monuments. Another Hooverville was set up just across the Potomac River, where it could be seen by those in Washington, D.C. Between the two locations, more than 15,000 veterans, their wives, and children had gathered together. Their purpose was to protest Congress and the President, demanding that they receive money they felt was owed to them. In 1924, the War Adjustment Act had been passed. This law stated that all veterans would be paid a bonus to make up for the wages they could have been making during the war. Unfortunately, this money was not supposed to be paid until 1944. In the midst of the economic hardships they were facing, these veterans insisted that the money be paid sooner rather than later. They referred to themselves as the Bonus Expeditionary Force. The bonus expeditionary force was told by the authorities to disperse and return to their homes. However, many of them didn't have a home to return to. Nearly 2,000 members of this bonus army refused to leave. President Hoover ordered General Douglas MacArthur to remove them from the city. Using tear gas and rifles, troops quickly cleared the National Mall before crossing the Potomac to move on to the second camp. The nation was in shock. American soldiers had attacked homeless veterans, setting fire to their shacks and huts. The veterans and their families fled Washington, D.C., but received no better treatment in other places. Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania all instructed them to keep moving along. Former soldiers, sailors, and Marines, who had once been thought of as heroes, were now viewed as thieves and degenerates. Once again, many saw Herbert Hoover as the source of this dilemma. Voters would express their disgust with the president when they went to the polls in November of 1932.
Well,
Proof positive that we repeat ourselves every
Yeah.
time.
Well, and I made this point to Susan earlier, that a lot of people think that all these government programs that they're putting on the chopping block in the big beautiful bill were things that, oh, we got extra money, let's do something for the poor people. It wasn't. It was the bonus army. They were shooting on their own soldiers. So what happened? Another president came in, he passed a new deal, Social Security Act, the 40-hour work week, they got the GI Bill of Rights. All those things were because of that bonus army. So when there's rioting in the streets, you know, all of a sudden there's got to be programs. I want to go fast forward now to the 1960s, because that's when we had the war on poverty. Let's look at 1967, the riots in Detroit.
The Detroit riots. In 1967, a riot broke out during a long, hot summer night in the Virginia Park neighborhood of Detroit, Michigan. Lasting more than 2 days, it was one of the most destructive riots in American history. We're going to take a look at what set the riots off, the riots themselves, and the consequences. In the late 1960s, the civil rights movement in the United States was growing stronger, but racial inequality was still a big problem. Deindustrialization of the cities and the desegregation of schools was causing a reshuffling of neighborhoods. As part of integration efforts, people of color moved into urban areas that were once predominantly white. But in response, many white people fled to the suburbs, some scared of integration, and some having lost their factory jobs. This phenomenon is called white flight and contributed to segregation. With many whites having fled urban centers, business owners and politicians neglected these new, mostly black neighborhoods, leading to overcrowding and deterioration. While Detroit spent money on developing and racially integrating the inner city, black residents of neighborhoods like Virginia Park were still dealing with housing and employment discrimination, poor access to medical services, an underfunded public education system, and racism from law enforcement. On July 23, 1967, at 3:15 a.m., the Vice Squad of the Detroit Police Department conducted a raid on an unlicensed bar on 12th Street in Virginia Park. Although it was late, the street was full of people trying to keep cool because of a heat wave. While the police were making arrests, a brick flew through a police car window, prompting the riots, looting, and fires that would rage for days. On July 25th, Governor George Romney called in the Michigan National Guard, and the riots finally ended on July 27th. But the damage and human loss was unprecedented. 43 people died. Over 1,000 were injured. Over 7,200 were arrested. More than 2,000 buildings and structures were damaged, and hundreds of families were left homeless. The riots accelerated the exodus of white people from the city, making segregation even worse. But it also drew attention to the problem. President Lyndon B. Johnson appointed a commission to figure out why the riots happened. The report found that white racism, discrimination, and poverty were to blame for the riots. It warned, quote, "Our nation is moving toward two societies, one black and one white, separate and unequal." 2 years later, the Stonewall riots would occur at the Stonewall Inn in New York City, which was targeted in a raid very similar to the bar on 12th Street. Like in Detroit, the spontaneous violence at the Stonewall Inn also resulted from discrimination, but this time against the LGBT community. The Stonewall was a popular safe haven for New York's gay community. Detroit and Stonewall would be the most destructive riots in U.S. history until the 1992 Los Angeles riots, which reflected similar issues of inner-city racial segregation and discrimination. The Detroit riots remind us that even a century after the Civil War ended, the violent legacy of racism and discrimination was still present in American culture, a legacy that echoes through modern society, where protesters and activists still fight for racial equality across the country.
Rather than spending a lot of time, I want to go right to the next one. So,
Okay.
can we just go right to the next one? We want to go right to this one about the history of immigration, the Immigration Act of 1965, and how it changed America.
The 1965 Immigration Act has to be seen first and foremost as a civil rights measure. It was passed at that time when the U.S. Congress was passing a variety of civil rights laws, of course the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And those laws eliminated discrimination, racial discrimination, prohibited racial discrimination in public accommodations. And there was a feeling in Congress that that same notion of ending discrimination should also be applied to U.S. immigration policy. Up until 1965, U.S. immigration policy was heavily biased in favor of Europeans, and in particular Northern and Western Europeans. Tens of thousands of immigrant visas were reserved for Northern and Western Europeans, while Southern and Eastern Europeans, and especially Asians and Africans and Middle Easterners, had very little chance to immigrate to the United States. They were discriminated against on the basis of their national origins. And there was a feeling across the country and in Congress that it was time to end that discriminatory practice. So the 1965 Immigration Act abolished what had been this national origin quota system that had been in place for more than 40 years. People from all countries, nationalities had more or less equal opportunity to immigrate to the United States. So it was a really landmark law in the history of U.S. immigration law.
So I know we're winding down, but that just, that war on poverty started, poverty's the enemy, because of the unrest, the civil unrest in the 1960s. And what we're experiencing now is we're trying to prevent that. We want it to be peaceful, but on Saturday, this coming Saturday, June 14th, at the North Adams City Hall, there's going to be a No Kings rally. There's going to be speakers, music, a march led by Greylock Together. Bring your own signs and flags. Bring your friends. It's going to be nonviolent. We're just going to try to demonstrate the fact that June 14th is not to be celebrated as a military parade for someone's birthday, that someone who wants to be a dictator and establish martial law throughout the country and bring the troops to our doorsteps. No, we want it to be a No Kings rally, just like we had in 1776 when we overthrew the king then. We don't want any kings now. And so we're going to organize. So come down to City Hall. Did I say the time? It's from 11 a.m. to 12:30. There'll be another one in Pittsfield, and there's thousands all over the country. We're going to be there, be nonviolent, but be seen. Power to the people.
Power to the people. Well, you think you're going to give me a ride to City Hall?
Yes.
We protest down there. We protest, I'll be there with you.
Okay.
Maybe only the two of us. What the
Yeah,
heck?
we'll bring a friend.
Yep.
So thank you very much.
Mistakes of the bosses we must pay for. In the cities and the farmlands, the trenches full of mud. War's always been the bosses' way, sir. The Union forever defending our rights. Down with the black level workers unite. With our brothers and our sisters in many far off lands. There is power